Invention in 1972, I took them together, the show, and they gave very good coverage. I appreciate this very much. And with regard to the black peoples all over the world, I think as the
By July 1975, General Gowon had been in office for 9 long years, the longest continuous period that any other Nigerian had served as head of state. A pleasant officer and a gentleman who neither smoked nor drank, Gowon's boyish good looks and genial broad smile endeared him to many Nigerians drawn across ethnic and religious lines. The fact that he was one of the best trained of our soldiers earned him the respect of members of the Nigerian Armed Forces, again across ranks, service, and discipline. Directly after graduation from Barewa College and his enlistment into the Nigerian Army, he was trained first in 1954 at the Royal West African Frontiers Force Regular Officers Special Training School at Teshi in Ghana. Then, between 1955 and 1956, he attended the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst in the United Kingdom, where his course-mates included Arthur Unegbe and Alex Madiebo, before his Staff College course in Camberley, United Kingdom. In 1962 and after, Gowon served twice as part of the Nigerian contingent of the United Nations Peacekeeping Mission to the Congo. He was appointed as the first indigenous Adjutant General of the Nigerian Army after his return from his second Congo posting, barely days after returning from another Staff College course at the Joint Service Staff College in the UK. The Major struck on January 15, 1966. And as we all bore witness, 7 months after, he emerged at 32, not just as Nigeria's head of state on August 1st, but as Africa's youngest head of state at the time. As head of state, it would be fair to say that he gave the job his best. As I implied in the preceding chapter of this volume, his most enduring legacy is that he successfully prosecuted the Nigerian Civil War, which consolidated the territorial integrity of Nigeria and its unity, thus reducing the possibility of succession. His famous "No Victor, No Vanquished" speech at the end of the Civil War, followed by an amnesty for a majority of those who fought on the Biafran side under a comprehensive reconciliation, reconstruction, and rehabilitation policy, was an unprecedented gesture of goodwill in a post-Civil War situation. But Gowon did a lot more. As I said in the previous chapter, he created 12 new states and promised to create more. He started the National Youth Service Corps Scheme, NYSC, designed to foster national unity by requiring Nigerian graduates to complete a 1-year national service program in parts of the country different from their own. In the face of the meteoric upturn in the economy, fueled by the unprecedented revenue from oil, national economic activity grew at an astronomical rate. Long before it became a popular parlance, Gowon was the original Mr. Infrastructure. New road networks were constructed across the country's length and breadth, and new bridges and air terminals sprang up in major cities. While still reeling from the dizzying heights of the oil boom, the Indigenization Decree of 1972, which declared many sectors of the economy off limits to the all foreign investments, was enacted while retaining only minority participation for foreigners in other areas. Although the decree provided windfall gains for many well-connected Nigerians at the time, it proved, many argued, detrimental to the non-oil sector of the economy. Then, for reasons attributable presumably to the extended stay in office, the administration started to face problems connected with accusations of corruption, not necessarily by the head of state, but by some of his appointees, among them Joseph Taka and the governor of Benue Plateau State, Joseph Gomwok. However, the direct motivation for overthrowing the government came from the unhappiness of junior officers in the administration over the change of dates of the return to civil rule. In his October 1st broadcast to the nation in 1974, Gowon announced that his promise made in 1970 to return the country to a democratic government was no longer realistic. Ironically, General Gowon's reason for continuing in office, what he described as a high degree of sectional politicking, intemperate utterances, and writings designed to whip up ill feelings within the country for the benefit of a few, had, as would be seen in subsequent sections of this volume, echoes of what I faced almost 19 years after to the day. Looking back now, Gowon's fears that it would not take politicians long to return to the old cutthroat politics that once led the nation into a serious crisis was the same dilemma I faced as president. In fairness, well before the October 1, 1974 announcement, General Gowon invited senior military officers from the rank of colonel upwards to deliberate on the subject in early September. At that meeting, which I recall went on for a while, opinion was split. Some officers believed that the administration's earlier promise of a handover date of 1976 to a democratic government should on principle be retained. Others supported the existence of the dates of return to civil rule indefinitely to ensure the establishment of more enduring political stability in the country. Some officers in this category probably felt they had not been compensated enough, presumably with political appointments for their sacrifices during the Civil War or for sustaining Gowon in power. An extension of military rule would of course be of benefit to them. On the periphery of this group were military officers and top civil servants alike who were convinced that the viable way forward was for General Gowon to transform himself from a military head of state to a civilian executive president, since the call by former President Nnamdi Azikiwe and others for a form of diarchy where the military and politicians would share power was beginning to gain traction. Some other officers expressed their displeasure at the ostentatious lifestyle of some of the military state governors and wanted them redeployed in the event of an extension. This request for redeployment was made even more poignant because during those years, military governors doubled as Supreme Military Council members and became too powerful and difficult to rein in. Within this group of officers were those who were also angling for a change in the administration's leadership while supporting an extension of military rule. Amid these debates, gradually things began to fall apart for the administration. Overwhelmed by its many challenges, the government's administration procedures became increasingly ill-defined to the dismay of everyone, civilians and military alike. Following the Public Service Review Commission report, not even the increase in civil service salaries succeeded in assuaging the people's feelings. After a 2-year inquiry into the organization and operations of the public services, the Udoji Commission recommended comprehensive administrative reforms and radical changes in salaries and levels of remuneration. In the end, many salaries were doubled, and the salary increases backdated to months before the September 1974 implementation date of the recommendation. Unfortunately, the decision backfired. The inflationary consequences of that vast and backdated salary rise spelled disaster for the administration and led to widespread labor unrest and the scarcity of such commodities as kerosene, tinned milk, and petrol. To prevent widespread discontent from spreading to the military, the government hurriedly decided to embark on the construction of the long-delayed military barracks around the country. To expedite the construction of the barracks, the Ministry of Defense authorized a unique purchase of cement from abroad. It caused several contractors to enter into agreements with 68 different international cement suppliers to deliver some 20 million tons of cement to the Lagos port, which had a capacity for only 1 million tons of cargo a year. Sometime in 1975, 400 ships were waiting to unload bags of cement at the Lagos port. The repercussions of this disastrous situation, which came to be known as the Cement Armada, tied up the country in different international litigations for years, including a court case in the United States of America that was finally sorted out by the US Supreme Court in 1983. The situation looked increasingly dire for the government. The feeling that the government should go was widespread even among the Nigerian populace. The mass media widely echoed the public view that the government of the erstwhile Civil War hero had become somewhat undynamic, flabby, and indecisive in policy implementation. There was discontent within the military and general agreement among the top hierarchy of the armed forces that the Gowon regime had to go. And it certainly didn't help that the relationship between General Gowon and Brigadier Murtala Muhammad was frosty, considering that Muhammad was seen as a kingmaker in bringing Gowon to power. As young officers, we could see that Muhammad, idolized by many of us in the army, was quite a handful in matters pertaining to control. However, when the final decision was made in early 1975 to remove the Gowon administration, the feeling was that another military regime would take over and prepare the country for civil rule. As documented in his memoirs, Diplomatic Soldiering, by Colonel Joe Garba, then commander of the Brigade of Guards, the final coordination of the coup's execution was left to him, to Lieutenant Colonel Shehu Yaradua and the Provost Marshal of the Army, Colonel Anthony Ochefu. Their coordination included securing the friendly neutrality of such superior officers as Major General Muhammad Shua, Brigadiers Murtala Muhammad, Ilya Bisala, Theophilus Danjuma, Olusegun Obasanjo, Olufemi Olutoye, Gibson Jallo, Ibrahim Haruna, Colonels Ibrahim Taiwo, and Abdullahi Muhammad, who was then the head of Army Intelligence. As commander of the newly established Armor Corps, I knew my buy-in would be crucial for the exercise, so I wasn't surprised when Lieutenant Colonel Shehu Musa Yar'Adua pulled me aside to suggest that the government change was necessary. In his own words, to save the country and preserve the integrity of the military. After our meeting, Yar'Adua co-opted others, including Colonels Paul Tarfa, Alfred Aduloju, Lieutenant Colonels Muhammadu Buhari, then the Director of Supply and Transport, Sani Bello, and Sani Sami. I recall that Brigadier Martin Adamu and General Gowon's ADC, Colonel Wilbam Walby, refused to be drawn into the plot. However, the plot details were leaked to Gowon weeks before the exercise. As I learnt later, the head of the Police Special Branch, Alhaji MD Yusuf, informed Brigadier Obasanjo about a possible coup plot. From all accounts, Gowon either didn't believe the security reports or, being his old cautious and circumspect self, felt that it was most unlikely that his most trusted aides would move against him. But he remained torn between doubt and conviction because on the eve of his departure to Kampala, Uganda, to attend the 12th summit of the Organization of African Unity (OAU) on July 28, 1975, he was said to have told Colonel Joe Garba, "Let the coup plot be on your conscience, but make sure it's without bloodshed," or words to that effect. In the early hours of Tuesday, July 29, 1975, while still in Kampala, Uganda, General Gowon was overthrown in a bloodless military coup d'etat. In his famous Dawn broadcast, Colonel Garba, his voice laden with emotion, announced that General Yakubu Gowon ceases to be head of the federal military government and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Nigeria. General Gowon received the news of his overthrow with equanimity in faraway Kampala, Uganda. Confronted by foreign journalists outside the corridors of the OAU conference hall, Gowon joked about his status as a private citizen, reminding all as he summarized his lines from William Shakespeare, "As you like it, that all the world was a stage where each person played their role before taking an exit." After that, he wished the new government in Nigeria well and retired to a new life in the United Kingdom. A day after the coup, 37-year-old Brigadier Murtala Muhammad emerged as the new head of state. But contrary to the general perception, his emergence as head of state didn't come about smoothly. On the evening after the coup, a meeting of senior officers, including brigade commanders and GOCs, was convened at the Dudan barracks at the instance of one of the top military officers, possibly Lieutenant Colonel Yar'Adua, or was it Colonel M.I. Ushishi? One of the accusations against General Gowon, which in retrospect seemed unfair, was that he ran the business of government like a one-man show. So we, the younger, senior officers who had played a role in the coup, decided that the new post-Gowon government's leadership must be overtly collective. So while we concluded that Brigadier Murtala Muhammad should be the head of state, Our preference was for him to operate only as first among equals, especially in his dealings with the two other prominent senior officers, Brigadiers Olusegun Obasanjo and Theophilus Danjuma. But we knew Muhammad enough to know he would need to be persuaded to accept such an arrangement. So while the rest of us younger officers waited in an adjacent room, Colonel Wushishi, Lieutenant Colonels Joe Garba, Abdullahi Muhammad, and Yaradoa took Brigadiers Muhammad, Obasanjo, and Danjuma to another room to negotiate the terms of our proposals for a triumvirate-type leadership where Muhammad will be required to share power with Obasanjo and Danjuma. I couldn't describe the mood since we were absent from that meeting, but we were close enough to pick up Muhammad's thundering voice, rejecting such proposals outrightly. As far as I remember, the meeting lasted for hours past midnight. Finally, Murtala Muhammad agreed to be head of state while insisting that he would not be beholden to anyone as head of state. In a prompt style that typified his leadership, he quickly announced several retirements the next day, just as he had made new appointments. All officers above the rank of Major General or senior to any new government member were compulsorily retired. Those retired included such persons as the Chief of Staff Supreme Headquarters, Vice Admiral Joseph Way, the Deputy Chief of Staff Supreme Headquarters, Major General Hassan Katsina, the Chief of Staff Army, Major General David Ejo, the Chief of Naval Staff, Rear Admiral Nelson Soro, the Chief of Air Staff, Brigadier Emmanuel Ikwe, the Inspector General of Police, Alhaji Kam Salem, the Deputy Inspector General of Police, T.A. Fagbola, and Major General Adeyinka Adebayo. These retirements were followed simultaneously with new appointments. While the Commissioner for Works and Housing from the old SMC, Brigadier Olusegun Obasanjo, replaced Vice Admiral Way as the new Chief of Staff Supreme Headquarters, Brigadier Theophilus Danjuma replaced Major General Ejo as the Chief of Staff Army. Danjuma would change the designation of that position upon resuming of office to Chief of Army Staff, which has remained the designation ever since. The only surviving senior army officer from Gowon's SMC, Brigadier Ilya Bisala, also the NDA's commandant, became Minister of Defense. Alhaji Mohammed Diko Yusuf became the Inspector General of Police. Colonel John Yisa Doku took over from Brigadier Emmanuel Ikwe as Chief of Air Staff, while Commodore Michael Adelanwa replaced Rear Admiral Nelson Soro as Chief of Naval Staff. While all the military state governors and administrators of the East Central States were relieved of their appointments and retired with immediate effects, the SMC wore a new look with the appointment of 4 new GOCs. Brigadier Julius Ipola Alani Akinrinade, GOC 1 Division Kaduna, Brigadier Martin Adamu, GOC 2 Division Ibadan, Brigadier Emmanuel Abisoye, GOC 3 Division Jos, and Brigadier John Obada, GOC Lagos Garrison Organization. Except for Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Aduloju, who was in the SMC as the commander of the Signal Corps, and me, who was there in my capacity as commander of the Armor Corps, other members of the 20-man strong SMC were senior military officers who held critical political appointments as commissioners. These were Brigadier James Olulaye, Establishments, Colonel Joseph Nanven Garba, External Affairs, Colonel Dan Suleiman, Health, Lieutenant Colonel Shehu Musa Yaradoa, Transport, and Navy Captain Olufemi Olumide, Works and Housing. The remaining 2 other members of the SMC, Lieutenant Commander Godwin Ndubisi Kanu, Navy, and Lieutenant Colonel Mukhtar Muhammad, Army, held no political appointments. The early days of Muhammad administration witnessed an unprecedented wave of retirements in Nigeria's public service that had never been seen before. After the 12 military governors from the Gowon era were compulsorily retired, the government ordered a probe of their conduct in office. 10 of the 12 governors were found guilty of illegal enrichment and dismissed with ignominy. Brigadiers Oluwole Rotimi and Mobolaji Johnson were the only 2 not found to have enriched themselves illegally. Some civilian members of the Gowon cabinet were also found to have enriched themselves illegally. Apart from Alhaji Shehu Shagari, the finance commissioner, and Alhaji Ali Mongono, who was in charge of mines and power, The government found all others guilty of improper enrichment and were made to forfeit illegally acquired assets. Similarly, in a broad wave of retirements that affected thousands of civil servants, many top civil servants were also caught in the web of asset forfeiture of ill-gotten assets. Even the revered Federal Public Service Commission's chairman, Alhaji Sule Katagum, was not spared. He was also dismissed. Looking back now and writing as a member of the SMC, I realized we probably overdid the retirement exercise. The idea of retiring corrupt and incompetent public officers was appropriate, but because we failed to provide a platform for challenging retirement in the surge of events, some civil servants may have been victims of an unfair witch hunt. Goaded on by a seemingly over-exuberant mass media, we didn't look deeply at the implications of the mass purge, mainly as it affected the civil service. I'm not sure our federal civil service fully recovered from that purge. With the retirement saga behind him, Murtala Muhammad hit the road running. Convinced that a critical priority for his administration was the quick return of the country to civilian democratic rule, he promptly announced a return date as October 1st, 1979. Then, with speed and decisiveness that would endear him to many Nigerians, Muhammad quickly accepted Justice Aguda's recommendation for a federal capital territory in the present location and Justice Ayo Ifrikefe's panel recommendation for the creation of more states. Accordingly, he promptly created 7 new states, bringing the number of states from 12 to 19. The new states were Ogun, Ondo, Anambra, and Imo. Niger created from the old northwestern states, Benue from the old Benue Plateau states, and from the old northeastern states, Bauchi was created. A footnote to the creation of the new state saga should be mentioned here, even if only in passing. When Justice Irikefe's panel on the creation of states recommended the creation of Niger states, among others, the panel also recommended Bida as capital, inadvertently ignoring the fact that Minna was the provincial capital of the old Niger province and should, in my view, be picked as the capital of the new state. A simple fact of history inspired my position on the matter. As the 2 of the 3 old emirates of the old Niger province with first-class emirs, Kontagora and Bida, cancel each other out as choices for the capital. The only neutral place was Minna, which, as I stated above, had always been the provincial capital of the old Niger province. Fortunately, with support from my colleagues at the SMC meeting, where the decision was taken, an unusually smiling Murtala Muhammad put his thumbs up for Minna over Bida. Murtala Muhammad could be impulsive, but as head of state, he was surprisingly not brash. Those of us younger officers who got closer to him, usually during SMC meetings, saw a softer, more humane side to him. The image of him that percolated through the Civil War years as a complex, uncompromising, aggressive man seemed to have dissipated, and in its place was the image of a committed officer who sincerely wanted to move the country forward. The perception of Muhammad as a man of deep conviction has stuck with me ever since. Equally, in foreign policy matters, Muhammad earned the international community's administration, especially that of his fellow African leaders. Not only did he jettison Nigeria's non-alignment stance concerning the Cold War politics of the era, but he boldly supported the Marxist-oriented People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, in defiance of the wishes of President Gerald Ford of the United States. When it became clear that the US and the apartheid South African government were funding the opposition movement in Angola, under Murtala's watch, Nigeria attempted to counter those moves by providing adequate resources to MPLA for its liberation struggles. Nigerians proudly remember Muhammad's famous statement at the OAU summit titled, "Africa has come of age." Africa will not bow to threats from any so-called superpowers. The other significant contribution of the Muhammad administration was his attempt to demobilize the bloated post-Civil War army to reduce the expenditure drain. One of the first things Brigadier Danjuma did after becoming the Chief of Army Staff was to appoint me as chairman of the committee charged with devising ways to achieve that objective. The modest Nigerian army of less than 100,000 before the Civil War had grown to a relatively well-equipped army of over 250,000 at the war's end. The security implications of such a standing army in peacetime were obvious, considering that many existing officers were field commissioned officers who could not be fully engaged after the war. Yet, if everyone agreed that the size of the army needed to be reduced to no more than 100,000 men, the challenge for us as a committee was how to do this in a way that would not attract resentment and bitterness within and outside the military. How do you overnight throw into the job market over 100,000 non-disabled men who had acquired military skills and were also proud that they had fought to keep Nigeria united? This problem was a hot potato, and some of us in the committee instantly understood why General Gowon handled it cautiously. And as we shall see, this problem would re-echo in the life of the Muhammad administration. However, a different problem had a louder resonance than the demobilization question. Recall that after the overthrow of General Gowon, there were no officers above the rank of brigadier in the army. Then, as part of a mass promotion exercise in January 1976 that led to my elevation to the position of a full colonel, 12 new major generals emerged. Among them, Alani Akirinadi, Olufemi Olutoye, Mohammed Shua, James Oluleye, Martin Adamu, Henry Adefokwe, and Ilia Bisala. However, Brigadiers Danjuma and Obasanjo emerged as lieutenant generals, while Brigadier Murtala Muhammad became a 4-star general. Although not much was thought of them then, these promotions brought about disruptions in the scheme of things. While some officers may have been sidelined, others felt uncomfortable that they had been subordinated to their former colleagues or former junior officers. Major General Bisala's position stood out. It seemed that Major General Bisala took unkindly to the fact that his erstwhile colleague, Chief of Army Staff Brigadier Danjuma, who should politically report to him as Defense Minister, had suddenly, as Lieutenant General, become militarily his superior officer. Apparently, Bisala never forgot this, which he saw as a rebuff and would explain in part his involvement in the field coup that led to the assassination of Murtala Muhammad.